Good morning, everyone. It is exactly 20 past 10. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Karen Walstra, who will be hosting this workshop for us on keeping humans in the loop, reasserting human judgment in the age of AI. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen, and we look forward to engaging with you over the next hour.
So hi everybody, I'm excited to be sharing with you some thoughts and ideas. I would love for you to pop questions into the chat. Eugenie, will you field the questions for me and you can just interrupt me as we go along? Would that be all right?
Yes.
And then there are also some activities or things I'd like for your comments. So I don't think you can unmute yourselves, but please pop your responses into the chat. So hi everybody, I'm a teacher. I taught for 30 years. I taught from grade R to grade 11. I never taught matric. And I now work with schools and educational institutions and higher spaces of learning in terms of how do we change the way we teach. And for me, AI is just another tool, but it's how do we use this tool really effectively? And how do we not withdraw ourselves? I really believe in us taking ownership of what we do in terms of technology and really be the humans in the loop. So let's explore this. So if we look at the theory of pedagogical judgments, it's got three main areas. There's pedagogical actions, there's pedagogical reasoning, and there's pedagogical responsibility. And for me, I think even when we're using AI, these three areas should really be important and focused on for us as individuals. So if we think about pedagogical action, action is where we as the teacher make the choice. We decide on the actions we will take, whether they're intentional or unintentional. So just by our behaviors and our personalities, we might make choices that we don't even realize we're going to be making. So completely unintentional. In other instances, when we are teaching, they're very intentional. And these would be our role as the teacher. And this might happen during a lesson or even outside the classroom area. So thinking about how we interact and how we react to things. The next one is looking at pedagogical reasoning. So from a pedagogical reasoning, we're looking at our rationale for our pedagogical actions. So if we think about that, when we do something, there's a reason sort of behind it, why we did it. And these would differ from teacher to teacher, our different interpretations, our different rationales, our different backgrounds, all of those things impact it. And therefore, we each have our own pedagogical reasoning. And we need to be aware of that when we are teaching and when we're using artificial intelligence. We need to think about that as well. And then the last one is pedagogical responsibility. So as teachers, it's the engagement with our sense of obligation. We all have or know or should know the SACE code of conduct and how we should be behaving as responsible teachers, our ethical principles in terms of how we behave, how we show up, how we prepare our lessons, all of those types of things. And also then what about our situational constraints? We need to be aware of those and how we're teaching to the best of our abilities within those three spaces. So it's looking at those three things and then saying, how does this then become our pedagogical judgment? So when we're thinking about how we incorporate these and how we then work, we come up with things like, what is our lesson content like? What are our lesson techniques? The tasks, how are we going to get them done? What determines verbal exchanges, allowable noise levels in our classes, groupings for instructions, and a degree of student movement. So how do we build this in with our other feelings and interpretations and beliefs in terms of that? So I did some work with a group of teachers, and when we looked at that, we looked at the pedagogical judgments, and the focus was on trying to get the teachers' actions and responsibilities and reasonings when exploring AI content for ECD lessons, while expressing their opinions and experiences and views to understand how teachers' teaching and learning may change when using AI technologies and are integrated into the lessons. So we started off by finding out who these teachers were. So they were a group of teachers within different ECD centers. 6 of them were center leaders and 4 of them were just teachers. Some of the center leaders also taught, but this was the breakdown. And then before we began, I said to them, so how do you use, or do you use artificial intelligence? And 80% of them said yes, they did. And 20% of them said no, they'd never used artificial intelligence. They'd heard about it, but they didn't know what it was. And then for those who were using AI, I said to them, what are you using? So only one person was actually using ChatGPT. The others had only been aware of the WhatsApp AI. And they thought that the WhatsApp AI was sort of the only kind of AI that they had. You'll see that the person who said ChatGPT was also using WhatsApp AI. So I then asked them, how do you use your AI tools? So we've got those 2 people who said we've never used it. But the vast majority said they use it to create little activities and lesson ideas for their children. We then spoke about how do you get the ideas, and a couple of them said they don't actually type the prompts, they talk the prompt. So they use it from a text point of view, from a verbal point of view. And then all of them who use AI said they also asked the AI personal questions. So it wasn't just being used for school, it was also being used for other tasks and activities. And then we looked at what challenges that they'd experienced. So some said that they had difficulty in working out how they use the AI, what it was, could it get going, and people had to explain it to them. And sometimes the ideas that they received were not appropriate, that they were not for their age group of children, and that the tasks didn't relate to that. They didn't always get the answers they wanted, came up, and that they didn't feel that the responses were right. So I suppose it's taking all of those kinds of comments and putting them together in terms of the prompting that they were creating was not giving the responses that they were looking for. And only one person said no, they were happy with everything that they got. I then asked them, do you check your AI responses? And one said 10%, 2 of them said yes, they did, but more than, or 50%, so more than half of those who were using the AI never actually questioned it. They saw it as, this is the right thing, it's the answer I'm getting, and I don't need to check it at all. And if I'm thinking about the workshops that I've been doing with teachers and other people around us, this is common. There are many people who are using artificial intelligence and just don't question it. They think that it's okay and it's acceptable and they can just go ahead and use it and never have to look at it again. So we need to be really aware of this. So what are some considerations as teachers we need to think about? So if we now go back to our pedagogical judgment and the AI usage, let's explore that a bit further. If we're creating a prompt or we're looking for information about lesson content, we're using AI to create these plans and lessons. If we're using lesson techniques, we might be using the AI to suggest the actual technique or the activity or how we're going to teach it. If we're doing a task, we're getting them to create things for our learners. And if we're looking at who determines verbal exchanges, we might be using something like an AI random number generator. Or you might even be getting to a space where, what is the allowable noise level in your classroom? What about AI monitors being used in classrooms that actually say, hey, your space is not environmentally safe, it's too loud? Or getting your AI to create groups for instruction. So looking at that, and then even looking at the degree of movement. There are AI tools that are motion sensors and could be in classrooms in terms of flagging when children are moving around. So when we're looking at this pedagogical judgment tool, all of it, if we wanted to, could be used with AR usage. And so as teachers, we really need to be aware of how broad this is, and are we going to use it all the time? And is it appropriate to be using it all the time? So might this be a concern for you that you use AI so much? I'd love you to put your thoughts into the chat as we go through this. Was information validated in terms of creating these things? So when we looked at the teachers that I worked with, initially they didn't do any validation in terms of their tasks and engagement. Was the content carefully checked? So for me, would you like to pop some comments into the chat around if you were using artificial intelligence and you were validating it, would it be a concern to use AI for all of these things? I'll give you a minute or two to pop some comments into the chat. And please reply everyone and not just me. I'm assuming you would reply to everyone. I don't see any comments. If any come in, Eugenie, you can tell me. Oh, was that Peepus a comment? No. And then was the context local is also really important and something we need to consider. So if we're now understanding AI in a South African context, the first thing I want you to think about is what does this actually mean in terms of us? So I'm going to start off by looking at a survey that was conducted across the board. I think there were more than 1,000 participants, and looked at how South Africans are adapting technology. It was one of the countries that participated in it. So what they saw with their participants is that there was this widespread familiarity with AI, and that it's almost now seen as common knowledge. So 39% of the people said they felt very familiar, and 30% said exceptionally familiar. Nearly 70% no longer regarded AI as a niche topic, and it was commonly understood tool shaping their lives. The AI ecosystems and the market was defined by a widespread use and a wide, diverse range of tools from the people who were interviewed. So 90% of them were actively using AI technologies. ChatGPT was used by 88% of them, and then Meta and Gemini were used by 79% and 51% respectively. And then there were others that were also using Copilot and Grammarly and others. From a professional and a personal point of view, the AI integration into their daily lives, 56% said they were using the AI tools at least once daily for personal tasks. 53% that they employed AI in work and related activities. And then looking at integration highlights due to dual roles AI plays, this is bringing convenience and efficiency into these both spheres, is what the study was highlighting, that people in the country are using it and they're using it in different environments. But then we need to look at AI from an African point of view. So Africa is this very large continent with a lot of people, but we actually produce a small amount of data compared to other parts of the world. So for example, the first thing we need to look at is how do we close this digital divide? So this digital divide is actually causing us to have a bias against us in terms of data. And so looking at how African countries can contribute so that the small portion of data can actually be extended if we close this divide, so that AI models can be trained and can begin to understand our context much better. And then a focus of a more data production and dissemination and not just protection is what the academics are asking governments to look at. And that official stakeholders in Africa, especially policymakers, should not just look at improving safety, but they should be looking at robust governance structures and infrastructures as well, that they design and implement and develop AI for adoption and a use that people feel comfortable within that. And that industry stakeholders look at capacity development that look and address specific African needs. And we see a range of these examples busy happening across the country and across the continent, which is really exciting. So what do we need to be aware of from an AI bias point of view? So AI bias is machine learning bias or algorithm bias. It's the technology has some form of bias against a range of different things. This can then perpetuate human biases that we see within society from a historical and a social point of view, and can reinforce inequalities. So the first one we're going to talk about is availability bias. So availability bias is AI models don't have access to large amounts of public data in one area, and then they neglect the perspective of another. So if, for example, you're using a tool that's developed in China, the perspective there would then be from a Chinese point of view and not from an African point of view, and therefore our perspective might be ignored completely. Or confirmation bias. It's the psychological tendency where individuals look for information that confirms their existing beliefs, and they just ignore evidence that challenges that. I mean, we already see that in social media, and AI now can perpetuate those biases. So how are we training the data, or how are we putting data into systems that will actually alleviate those kinds of biases? And then contextual bias is where, for example, your large language models struggle to understand or interpret the context of a conversation, perhaps the nuance or the slang or information like that, or maybe the prompt was just not accurately written. And so therefore there's a misunderstanding of the context, and that can lead to inappropriate or misleading responses. Another kind of bias is training data bias. So training data bias is the data it was originally trained on. And it's where somebody as a person actually sat there and trained the data around that. And so, for example, one of the first types of data training was on facial recognition. And the people whose faces they used were generally white. And so there was a huge bias in terms of recognizing people of color, because the computers didn't realize that in the world we have so many different nationalities and differences, and like everybody's not the same color. So that's just a really practical example, and this can be in anything. It could be a cultural thing, could be a historical thing. Who is the data? What is the data that it's been trained on? Then algorithmic bias are examples where the algorithm itself is written in such a way that it unintentionally discriminates against a group of people. So say, for example, it's taking a group of people in Europe and it says they're doing this kind of job and this is the salary they're getting. It then assumes that everybody in the world doing that kind of job gets that kind of money. So that's an algorithm bias. A cognitive bias is where you look at favoring data sets rather than a range of areas. It's very similar to algorithm bias, but here it's looking at, for example, if you're from America and it's taking that example over there, and then it's just interpreting it on everybody else who's using that information. So if we think about these biases, why is it important for us to then be humans in the loop? Well, first of all, we need to analyze the AI generated, whether it's a report or a summary. So if we then looked at it, and if the AI generates a summary of a report or a meeting, it's our responsibility as humans to review the key findings for accuracy and completeness. So not just accept, oh, this is the summary and email it to everybody straight away, but actually go through it and saying, were all the points accepted? Do we need to fix this? Do I need to add something in before it? It's important to ensure that no critical information is missed. So again, looking for accuracy and completeness in the tool. Then checking for bias or misinformation. So as the people, we might identify potential bias or misinterpretation in terms of how the AI has generated it. And then crucially looking at making it fair and making informed decisions. So maybe having to tweak it, checking that the decisions are fair and informed. And then adding human insight. So if the AI detects absenteeism at school, the humans might add a reason, for example, that it's winter and more children are sick. The AI wouldn't know that. So that would then be needed to be added into the report and the meeting if it just says that there's large absenteeism. The human needs to put in the context. So the human adds their own insights and interpretation to the analysis, providing a more nuanced understanding of the data. And then what about local knowledge? When the AI generates this report, the human adds the information about individuals or the impact, say, for example, of a lack of devices or something like that. So the human adds local knowledge to AI-generated reports. And so we need to be the people in it. We should not just be accepting what's there. Other considerations might be language diversity, that we consider the multilingual nature of the region and how the AI is implementing the solution. The human needs to verify and should account for potential errors in the language translation or interpretation. So we shouldn't just accept that the AI is right. We need to go in and look at the language it's produced and is it accurate? And in some ways, if you're doing this in the tool and you can tell it to correct it, you would be improving the AI, because every time you put a prompt into AI, you're actually teaching it. Whether it's rubbish or whether it's real, the AI is actually learning from it. So we also need to be aware of what we're putting in. And then local regulations. We need to ensure that the AI solution applies with local regulations and data privacy laws in terms of what we are checking. So we should be involved in verifying this compliance. And then infrastructure limitations. We need to be mindful of impactful infrastructure limitations, such as internet connectivity or when implementing AI solutions. So not assuming that everybody has same access, or if we're wanting everybody to have the same access, making sure that that's an offline AI kind of tool where they are able to access the information and engage with the information the way you want them to. So the human intervention can be crucial in areas with limited connectivity. Then looking at human in the loop, what about predictive analysis? So validating the predictions. So it might identify patterns and predictions, but might have missed the nuances within that. So as the person, we then really look at the contextual knowledge and the experience to assess plausibility of the AI's output. So if an AI predicts a significant increase in student enrollment, the human then might add administrative staff might validate external factors that are saying it. For example, there might be negative press about a certain space and the government is funding from that field, and so there's this competitive program around institutions, and so the AI doesn't know about it, and that's why there's an increase or a decrease in enrollments. So looking at how we are looking at that, what about also from a predictive point of view, adjusting the models? That the human feedback is essential in refining and improving it. So if you are using it and you're seeing the errors, whether you're checking it in the AI or outside, you should almost be putting feedback back into your tool so that it won't make those same mistakes again, and that you're really building on that knowledge. So we can provide targeted feedback based on real world outcomes, allowing the AI to learn from its mistakes and improve its predictive accuracy. The AI might predict that students can complete a specific online module and will perform well in subsequent exams. And then the human needs to observe the students aren't performing as predicted, and they can provide feedback to the AI about why that's happening, and so that we get a better response going forward. What about risk assessment? So if we look at humans, we and bear the responsibility of assessing our students, we need to be able to validate the predictions. So we can't just say we're using AI tools and that's going to go through for everybody. We also shouldn't be just moderating some of them. We should actually be moderating well from a range of points of view. So we need to evaluate the potential consequences of making decisions based on AI insights and consider the benefits, but we also need to really critically look at the potential downsides. And are the tools we're using being disadvantaging some of the students or the people we're engaged in? So it might predict that a certain group is a high risk for dropout. While this prediction might be valuable, a human counselor might assist the risk by intervening in a particular way, sort of singling out particular students or offering support within that space. And teachers could weight the potential benefits by preventing the dropouts that they're looking at, and looking at perhaps students who are stagnating or misaligning resources. And so as people, it's not just talking to the AI, but it's taking the information and also seeing how we are using the information that we're receiving more beneficially. So from a South African point of view, demonstrating growth and embrace in South Africa, we see again that there are these studies of how South Africans are using AI. And so from a lecturing point of view or a teaching point of view, we need to be aware that our students are using artificial intelligence. And by the way, it's not just university students, it's high school students, it's primary school students, it's even foundation phase students. The stories I've heard from people is quite incredible in terms of how children are using artificial intelligence. And so we really need to think about how do we train and teach differently. So if we look at this from an optimism or versus an apprehension point of view, in this study, the respondents reveal from a range of different points of view. So 76% of them, AI will make their life easier and more convenient, that they express concerns about spread of misinformation or fake content. The ethical dilemma also came up in terms of 37% believe that AI is likely to be biased more than humans. And there was the fear of job displacement, the worry that the AI will eliminate jobs, casting shadows over enthusiasm. The trust in AI, there was a mixed bag of confidence and skepticism. So they looked at celebrating it in terms of streamlining processes, but they also spoke about a hesitance towards relying on it for essential decisions. And so I suppose that's where we as people really should take ownership and engage with the tool. So 38% said they wouldn't trust AI to make significant choices in their personal lives, which is low if you think about it. 78% of the users said sometimes, often, or always question the accuracy, which is good, highlighting a culture of critical scrutiny among AI users. And then we've got this double-edged sword, how users value AI benefits versus risks. So the consumers regard AI primarily as a helpful assistant from day-to-day tasks, but they still remain skeptical about the role in high-stake environments. 60% said they feel comfortable with AI involvement. 24% use it for medical diagnosis, and a broader public preference for retaining human expertise, where well-informed judgments was paramount. And then looking at it as a future AI tool and the question of human-like interactions, the potential of AI to evolve into a more human-like interactions remains divided, both curious and cautious about the implications of such advancements. And we've seen how much this has grown just in the last couple of months. An awareness and a discourse around AI growth and the complexities around it in terms of public sentiment and the integration into society was also looked at. So what I'd really like us to look at now is a simple factual summary of a complex social issue in Tembisa. So one of the most complex social issues in Tembisa or township says it's the following. There's high unemployment, there's infrastructure and service crisis, there's an impact of social economy, there's a housing and informal in settlements, and underlying governance issues. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read it, and then I'd like you to give ideas in terms of how would you check this. Thank you about the motion one. No, don't be sorry about the delayed response. That's wonderful. So how would you check this? Just put short sentences or comments into the chat. I'm going to carry on. So, how would you verify this response? Let's think about this. So, first of all, we need to really think about judging it. AI doesn't understand from a human sense point of view. It's a machine. It predicts patterns. It can lead to inaccuracies, biases, and a lack of nuance. So we really need to critically evaluate the generative AI content. Okay, for its sources, nice. Nice, thank you. Check out other links. Yes. Thanks for those comments. That's brilliant. Thank you. Decide on where human judgment is essential. So let's have a look at this example. The first thing is fact-checking with local sources. We could use reliable sources. So don't rely solely on the AI. Verify the facts, the stats, the data points with multiple local sources, such as the official city or regional government websites. Establish local news organizations, and even local universities. So finding reliable sources is really, really important. Cross-check references. Nice. Thank you. Sponsors from locals. Yes. Thank you. Great. We're all on the same page. This is exciting. Search for local context. If the AI gives you information about local policies, events, or history, perform a targeted search using terms like Wellington Council proposed bylaws or New Zealand Historical Society Wellington. So think about how you can actually be using it to make it local. Look for missing perspectives. Consider if the response omits any important local perspectives, such as those from local community groups or indigenous organizations or specific stakeholders. So it's having a discussion, I think, and teaching our students about that. Oh, Karen, I've gone backwards. And then think about how you would evaluate your AI response. What about request resources? Ask the AI to cite its resources. So a couple of you said that, for the information it provided. And then you need to go to those sources. Don't just ask URLs. Remember, an AI tool knows how to make a URL. So it'll then make it and it'll just disappear. So as the human, we need to actually look at that. So verify nice, reputable sources, confirm the accuracy, be alert to bias, seek input from local experts. There, you've got all my points. Reminder, you can carry on with the session, I think. Thank you. Identify inconsistencies and outdated information. So we need to look at the facts and claims and see, is there anything contradictory? Is this up to date? Look at checking. Be critical for assumptions. Think about the assumptions that the AI might be making. A local issue could be complex and require much deeper understanding than the AI's general purpose of training. And then if we then think about this, the last one is supplement with other methods. Compare different AI tools. So try the same prompt in different AI models and see what the responses are, and you can compare the outputs. Consult an expert. So people who have niche information about specific topics, and look at knowledge within those spaces. So if you just think of those ideas and the responses you got back, and we started thinking about those in terms of our teaching, can you see how we can be getting our children to become real critical and analytical thinkers just by getting them to be the human in the loop by the way that we ask our questions? So focus on and moves from a general AI literacy to the indispensable role of the human and an AI integrated educational landscape. So really being the human in the loop. So taking ownership of our engagement with the AI. So fact checking it, evaluating the response, and supplementing with other methods. Those are just 3 simple things that we could be getting our students to do, and really teaching them how to collaborate with the information. Showing them how we do it is also an example. So if you're doing a lecture and you've used AI, show your students how you verified it and fact checked it. Be the role model that we should be for our students. And we should do all of this before we use it, before we share it, before we put it into information. And I just realized I haven't put anything in here about citations, but we should be teaching our children how to write citations and descriptions of how they've used AI as part of our assessments and things that we're doing with our students. So if we now go back to our pedagogical judge, oh no, it's spelled wrong, and it's probably wrong on all the slides. Sorry, everybody. With AI usage. And we look at the lesson content, and we said we're using it to create lesson plans. First of all, we need to, as lecturers and teachers, realize we are the experts. So we should know our content knowledge, and then we need to check that subject information to see that it's correct. We need to make sure that it's relevant to our context, to your course module, to the country, to a curriculum, whatever it is, but making sure that the information is relevant to what you're wanting it to be. And you know your context. Are the activities appropriate for your learners? Are they too easy? Are they too difficult? Are they all the same kind and the students are going to get bored? Are they varied enough? And so we need to go in and take that lesson idea and really look at it critically, and either put other prompts in to get better responses of the lesson content, or just change it ourselves. But whatever it is, we need to explore that. So change and adapt the information to make it your own before teaching. If any of you have got any other ideas about how we can, or ideas around the examples I'm giving, please pop them into the chat as we go along. So what if we were looking at lesson techniques? Again, saying to the teacher, you're the expert. So really getting teachers to think about how they're using, or lecturers think about how we're using the AI. And in the same way, teaching our students. So are the suggestions relevant for the students? Are the activities relevant for the context? And change and adapt the information to make it suitable for yourself is really, really important. But what about the tasks to be done? So that looking at it from an expert point of view is important. But then we also need to think about AI is brilliant at making differentiated tasks. So are we writing prompts now to almost get the same kind of tasks that we've always done? Or are we writing prompts to actually get different things that perhaps we'd never thought of? Saying to the AI, this is what I want to teach. What could be a new type? These are the kinds of activities I've done in the past, or these are the kinds of questions I've asked. How can I make it different? How can it be more interactive or practical? Or are there other, these are research papers I've used, are there others that I could use? So think about how you can make the tasks really relevant for your space. And then going in again and adapting it and changing it. And remember, there are 2 ways of doing that. One, it's you going in and changing the prompt and pulling on more information. or you going in and just rewriting the task. What about now looking at verbal exchanges and who determines those? So the use of a number generator, is that fair? So would you use the task? Yes or no? Would you use something like a random number generator to get children to complete an activity? I'd love you to put yes or no into the chat, so we've got an idea of how many would say yes and how many would say no. That would be great. So if yes, how might you make sure that it's fair? Thoughts around that would also be useful. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. So would you use it? How would you make sure that the random number generator is fair? If somebody has used one before, perhaps you can put things that you learned about it in that space. If yes, does everyone get a chance? Are there repeats? How would you use the system better if there were repeats? So thoughts around that. For those of you that have never used a number generator, it's actually really useful, and there are a whole lot of free ones online. And some of them work that if you've got a class list, you just grab the names and pop them in, upload them as CSV, and it actually, in a small class, you won't be sure. Nice, okay. It then puts all the names in the table for you, so it doesn't have to be numbers. And what most of them actually also do is when a name or a number has been selected, you can actually delete it. So that then, Tony, would take away your idea where, in a small class, maybe you won't use it. But if you're worried about the repetitions, you just delete those that would come up or would be used. What about noise? So if you were using monitors for noise, would you use them? Yes or no? It would also be cool to know if you would use monitors for noise. If yes, who would set the limit? Would you allow it just to be on whatever the system says it is, or would you actually want to be able to control it? And also, would you research accessible noise levels within the class? Would you build your own knowledge before using a tool like this? And would you want to learn how to override the monitor? If so, when and how? I'd love you to think about that and pop some ideas down into the chat. I hope this is giving you some food for thought. I don't see any responses. I'm going to move on. So first of all, I think as teachers, we really need to know our children. We really need to know our learners, and we should still be controlling the behavior, the noise, all of those things. So yes, we might be using a monitor that could be a warning to our children if the room gets very loud, but we should still take ownership of our classes. That's my personal opinion. They are our learners and in our care. If we then looking at grouping instructions, would you use AI to make groups? So my personal opinion here is definitely yes. I think we don't use our data enough. And for me, one of the most exciting things with grouping was if you've got lots of data, if you're doing all your assessments and things online and your little quizzes, you end up with this wealth of knowledge about your children. And you can do a quick data sort in terms of whether you want randomized groups or whether you want groups by ability and all those kinds of things. I remember when I first started teaching, I would be handing out books, not handing out books, I would sit on the floor and make piles and say, this child is doing this really well, this one is in the middle, this one needs a lot of help. Now we've got tools to do that. So for me, grouping for instruction is just a wonderful, easy way to then really get our groups for our differentiated activities or our extension activities or our reinforcement activities, all of those kinds of things. So if yes, ensure your data is accurate and that your mark books or whatever you're using are up to date. So you then need, once it's done that, you should also have a look at what the groupings are and are they accurate, and will you move individual children around if necessary. Check your groupings. You know your children, you know how they interact with others, you know generally their knowledge ability, you know their behavior. So do you need to actually move some children around? Would you not put some children in a group, or would you put others together? So think about that. So it's still taking ownership, even if you agree with 90% of it. So again, we now know our children and we need to be in charge. They are our learners. How are we engaged with that? So if we now also think about it from a movement point of view, and we've got these sensors, I want you also to think about it from so emotion sensors. I want you also to think about it from a neuroscience point of view. So what we know about from a neuroscience point of view is that we need for our children to actually walk. It's actually really bad that we have lectures and we have lessons that go on and on and on, and we don't actually get our students to stand and take a break, or even turn around and stand and have a quick discussion with somebody behind us. And so the synaptic plasticity really has an important part in terms of whether our children actually, if it gets better or if it weakens over time. And it weakens when we don't move, and it strengthens when we do. And the ability to process our foundational learning also gets improved when we actually move. So if we look at different methods of teaching, active learning is much more effective. And we know that if we introduce things like agency and novelty and curiosity and social exchange and self-evaluation, that it helps improve memory retention. And that if we look at educational pedagogies which reinforce the learning circuit, where we're getting our children to really be involved, they are then rewarded by the behavior of this positive feedback. And so having quick brain breaks, whether they're 60 or 90 seconds of movement about every 15 minutes, can really improve how our children learn. So yes, we might have a monitor in our classroom that monitors movement, but we should be encouraging movement within that space. So if we now think about that and we're looking at movement, would you use a motion sensor in your classroom? Yes or no? If yes, is the monitor understanding the type of movement you allow? So maybe it's set up that nobody's allowed to move, and if anybody moves slightly, so the monitor keeps going off all the time. Or maybe it's set up that there's allowed to be movement. Is it set up that you've got different sensors almost facing different children, that at least everybody gets up? And is there a reminder to somebody to say, hey, you haven't stretched your legs, a bit like we're seeing in the cars at the moment? If yes, is the movement in your classroom always the same? So would you have the same setup, or do you have different versions set up depending on the type of lesson? And would you learn how to override this? And would you learn about this technology if it's put into your classroom? Or would you just accept what the school leaders or academics decide it was going, or heads decide it was going to be? And again, I think we need to say, no, it's our classroom. We should be able to decide how the learners work in it. We need to take charge of how we engage. So if we now think about all of these things, are we as teachers being in charge? Are we actually taking ownership of all these different aspects? Are we validating and verifying the information? Are we truly being the humans in the loop? So what are the concerns? So the potential concerns from teachers are the potential loss of human touch. So the reduced human interaction due to over-reliance of AI tools. We're also seeing a huge reliance on AI companions and relationships the limited social and emotional support, so AI support instead of people, the lack of nuance and context, so AI may struggle to understand the language, things such as sarcasm, humor, cultural references, or full language competence, or the lack of context and content. The AI may struggle to know the South African curriculum if it hasn't been told. So has the school AI literacy discussions happened? Have we included parents and learners in terms of over-reliance and reduced human interaction? Do we know our learners, and are we aware of their social lives and how they're interacting? My daughter is at a high school here where she's got 3 grade 8s who are using AI companions because they just say, no, they can't go out with boys. The boys are too nasty. So we really need to know our learners. And then, and the AI companions in terms of manipulation things also becomes crazy. We need to, from an emotional point of view, children may turn to AI who are lonely or bullied or angry. So we need to look at how we as a school or a community are supporting people who are feeling vulnerable, who are feeling neglected, all of the social emotional things we are seeing in society now. How are we aware of those? We need to teach our learners how to prompt. We need to teach them to learn to prompt for learning and not for being lazy. They still have to write their exams and their assessments. They still need the knowledge. So we need to empower them to be responsible AI users. We need to have policies that guide not only all our staff members, but also our learners in terms of how we can use AI, how we can evaluate tools, how we can learn more, how we can develop our knowledge. And we need to inform our parents and teachers about this as well. And then we need to teach our children to prompt properly, to help them remove bias, and teach them to be the humans in the loop, to check, to verify, to take ownership. And if we think about that, it's how do we change the way we ask questions? How do we change the way we assess things? How do we build our tasks from that point of view? So we need to teach our learners to be critical and analytical thinkers in this age of AI. We need to be aware of things like policies, like this UNICEF guidance policy. So looking at data privacy and ensuring the safety of our children. Looking at transparency and explainability and accountability. So how it impacts the children we're teaching. We need to empower our teachers and our parents so that they must know what are the insights that they uphold. We need to prepare our children for present and future development. So how are they prepared? Are they contributing to responsible AI for the future? How are we creating an enabling environment and not a stifling one to make it possible for all to contribute to child-centered artificial intelligence? So the importance of ethical and responsible use of AI by all users is really important. We need to take part in the discussions, and the negative things that we are seeing, we need to have a voice for the positive and how we can change. As South Africans, we need to describe our context. If you write a prompt without saying you're South African and then write one with, just see the difference in terms of the response. If you describe your learners, the race, the gender, all those types of things, the answers just come back much more full. So we need to proactively be these humans in the loop to validate the information. So we need to be the humans to provide critical valuation. We need to look at the insights and add the nuances that the AI can analyze. We need to look at local knowledge and enhance AI reports. And as humans, we need to ensure ethical AI system deployment. We need to be this human in the loop. And then, are we using it responsibility as adults? We need to become involved in the discussions. I think we need to be polite. I really don't think we should be angry, because every time we put something to an AI tool, we're teaching it. And so if that's how we want to be treated by AI in the future, we need to be polite. We need to really think about how we teach our children to write prompts without bias. And so if I go back to the teachers that I worked with, they saw a change. They speak about changed behavior in terms of using the AI. They felt more comfortable. They checked the AI comments. they verified and checked the information. The prompts with the context and examples provided, they got better results. They were teaching other teachers in their schools about responsible use and effective use. And there was this positive vibe that was happening in the spaces. And some had conducted workshops with their parents to teach them about AI, but also to teach them about AI apps in terms of things like Read Along and Duolingo ABC, that the little children could be using the tools to improve their own learning, but not actually using AI as an AI tool. So if we look at the pedagogy of judgment, we empower the teachers to critically evaluate the AI outputs rather than accepting them at face value. As the teachers, they gained and developed the ability to use the AI tools in lessons, ethically, responsibly, and being humans in the loop. And so I think that's what we need to do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Karen. You know, as I listen to these conversations, and I've, as I said earlier, been to so many talks about AI, I've always grapple with how I walk away with even more questions maybe than answers. There's just so much uncertainty involved. And so maybe I want to open up. Well done. I see we have a full 4 minutes left. If there's anyone in the room that would like to switch on their microphone and maybe ask a question or make a comment, you are more than welcome to do so. We still have time.
Thanks for the comments that you've written. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone who has a closing statement or question you'd perhaps like to ask? No, all right. Again, thank you very much, Karen, for this wonderful workshop that we were able to attend. Thank you for also incorporating the engagements, although the room was slightly quiet initially. Let's quickly have a look on the program. I know there is also a 5-minute quick break in between. So we will then start up again at 11:25 for anyone that is interested in attending the Track 2 research paper presentation. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your engagement. Bye-bye.